Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to show you how to work with APIs in N8N. If you really want to get the full value of N8N, in my opinion, and you really want to build robust agents and workflows, then you absolutely need to understand how to call APIs. That way you can get all the data that you need in order to make your agent do whatever it is that you want to do. So with that being said, here in our N8N workspace, I went ahead and I set up 4 different starter nodes or trigger nodes that we're going to be working with. And I'm going to take you step by step on each one. Now, with that, I'm also going to provide in the description below, not only will I provide the template for this when we get done with it, I'm also going to provide this document here that's just going to walk you through exactly what an API is, working with JSON data, query parameters, bodies, and header authentication. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and start with the first one. We're gonna go ahead and start with Appify. All right, so in this case, I'm using a form, all right, a form which is basically a native trigger in N8N. Also note though, once we get to the last example here, I'm actually gonna show you how to pull information into N8N from external resources, maybe like a form or something like that, so that you're getting data without having to always log into your N8N account. Okay, so for the Appify scraper that we're going to be using, and I put Appify in a prior video, but again, just in case you didn't know, Appify gives you a ton of different web scrapers to use. And what a scraper is basically it pulls information off of a web page on the internet. Okay, so in this case, we're going to use the Zillow detail scraper. All right, so this here is an Appify actor. And by default, it comes here with a couple different URLs of Zillow properties that we can pull. Whenever you're looking to work in an API, you don't just want to dive directly into just all the technical stuff. You always want to go and you want to read your documentation first. So reading documentation is definitely the way to go, right? And so as you see here, it just has what it can do. And well, it's pretty simple. It can pull all these different things here. It can pull the home type, the price, right? Cities, all these things. But what we're looking for as far as working with APIs, we're looking for exactly what do we need in order to trigger the API and what are we going to get back. So this here, they provide an input example. All right, so it says for input, you can either use the fields in a console setup, which is basically using the UI here. But because we want to build this for our N8N instance, we're going to input it directly as a JSON item. Basically, this here is what it expects when we input it. This is just kind of an example. And this is an example of the output that we can get, right? So you see in their example, they input this URL here, and as an output, they got all this information here, right? So they can see where it was listed. They can see that it's for sale. This is the price when it was built, right? All this information they're scraping off of Zillow. All right, so we're gonna go back up here to inputs. When I was first getting started with N8N, I heavily used Appify because it's a very easy platform to learn. All right, and I'm going to show you exactly how to get started here. Okay, so if you come here to manual, right? So this is if we wanted to do it through the web, right? So I can come here and I can hit run and start, and this actor would go ahead and scrape all this property data. But that's not what we want right now, right? So I want to take a look at the JSON, all right? And you're probably like, okay, well, what's JSON data? All right, so here in this document that you're going to have, I have what's JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And basically, this is how it works, right? So you see here we have this name. Well, that's an object, and this is what it's referring to. So if you go back to actor in our case, we actually can see that, okay, this here is the object. The object is address or addresses, and this here is an address. These here are URLs, so this is URL. This is the method that it's using, right? So we see here it's very similar, right? Just like in the example here, we have name, John Doe, email. We have the example here. All right, so same exact thing. Okay, so if we want to call this, well, what are the inputs, right? So let's start there. What are the inputs that it needs, right? So this actor, it can input either a URL, you can input an address, right? And then it has different items here you can do, right? So it's status of property. So you can see if the status is for sale, sold, or for rent, but we're not going to mess with all those things there. All right, so let's assume that for this, we want to go ahead and just input a URL, right? So what I'm going to do, so first, actually, let's take a look. So we have it by addresses. If I switch back to manual, you'll see that it took this address here in JSON. Well, if we want to do it by just URL, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click the X button here. All right. And I'm just going to remove all these so we just have one item. And as you see, look at that, right? Very, very slimmed down. All right. So we have some other items here in this JSON object. So now if we want to pull data with the scraper, we're going to need to fire an HTTP request. Well, actually first, Now that we know what data we need, we actually need to configure our form actually. So field name, we'll just say Zillow URL. All right. And N8N has a couple different like presets here. So but we can just leave it as text. It's fine. All right, so if I come here and I hit test step, as you see, a form pops up here, and I can basically input the URL. All right, perfect, that's what we want. So let me go ahead and pause this now. All right, awesome. Now we need to add an HTTP node. So I'm gonna type in HTTP request. So one of the first things that you're gonna see here is that it's asking for a method, right? So again, if you go back to the API documentation I provided, we see that really there are four main types of request. Now, granted, N8N has more than four, but the reality is whenever you're working in N8N, 90% of the time you're gonna be using get and you're gonna be using post. All right. But just in case, I included some other items here for you. So you have get, post, put, delete. And if you do end up using more than post or get, more than likely you're going to use post and delete, right? You're probably not going to be using anything else. So let's actually dive into the different methods, right? So for these four methods, we have a get method, which is basically used to retrieve data from an API, all right? And just in case you don't know what an API is, I also provided the description here. So it's application programming interface. So we use a get when we want to get data, right? So the example I provided here is get all contacts from a CRM. Post is when we want to create something new in the system, right? So we want to maybe send a message, so we're going to post it. Put is used to update something that already exists in a database. So if there's already information, let's say for player 1234, if you want to update the record, you can update player 1234 with a new name or something like that. And then delete is pretty much just removing something. So if you want to delete a record, you can use the delete method. So for the case of our method, right? So if you want to know what method do we use, well, you're not just going to guess. You're going to come here to the documentation. Now, in the case of N8N, they really provide here it is, the API endpoints here. So if I click on API endpoints and I come here, this is the one that we're going to use because we're going to run it and get the dataset items. But you're going to notice that it says post right here. Okay, post, right? Very important. This means that we're going to be sending in information, right? Just like the documentation said, we're sending in information. So in the case of Appify, right, the way that it's set up, right? So first I'm going to go to my method. I'm going to go on post, and then we have a URL. Okay, so very important to note with Appify, and the reason I want to start is because it's one of the easiest APIs to work with, because in the URL, right, that we provide, which by the way, whenever you're working with an API, there's usually a URL that you send your request to, all right? And that URL is what taps into the system and makes things happen. So in the case for Appify, their API is very simple to work with because they also provide all of the authentication and everything in the URL. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just hit this button. I'm gonna copy, and come back over to N8N. I'm gonna go ahead and paste it. Okay, perfect, my URL is pasted. Now, you might see this authentication. Again, I mentioned that in the case of Appify, it already handles that. In the URL, there's a token there. You couldn't see it, obviously, because it's blanked out. But when you create your account, you'll have your own token ID. And you make sure you don't share it, because anybody that has it can go in here and run actors on your behalf and cost you money. Okay, perfect. So you might wonder how to set up query parameters, headers, body. And in the other examples, we're actually going to get into all those. Okay, so what's the next thing that we need, right? So we see here for this actor, well, there's a JSON body here, right? So this here is what it's expecting in order for us to run. All right, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna come back into here, I'm gonna click on send body, and I'm gonna go ahead and under specified body, I'm just gonna select using JSON, and I'm gonna paste it here. Now, obviously, this, we don't just wanna run this because this is gonna get the URL that's already preset to. So in our case, let's say we want to run this property here, right, that we see for sale. Okay, so what we're going to do in our form, right, so actually what we need to do is we actually need to test our form. So I'm going to disconnect it. I'm going to paste our form, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to copy the URL from here. Actually, let me pause it and refire it. All right, I'm going to copy the URL from here, from Zillow. I pasted it. I'm going to hit submit, and great, we see that it came through here. Again, a JSON item. This is the Zillow URL. They gave us a timestamp when it happened, but all we need is URL. Perfect. Now that we have that, what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to pin this. So whenever you're testing workflows, especially with API calls where you're kind of paying a little bit of money every single time you make a call and you're testing, it's a really good practice to pin the data so you don't have to keep running it over and over again. So I'm going to drag this to the HTTP node. I'm going to come in here and hit open. Great. We have the URL here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle this as an expression. And basically what that enables me to do is it enables me to dynamically map fields in N8N. So I'm going to go ahead and drag the Zillow URL item that we got from the form. And as you see, it mapped to the URL that I just had. And we actually needed to go here in this URL object. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to, I like to put a little X in the spot or something so I know where I need to kind of copy and paste it. So I'm going to paste it right there. And then I'm just going to remove the X. That's just something I do, but I do that as just a placeholder. Okay, perfect. So this is exactly what we're going to be sending. All right, so basically what should happen now is that when I go and I paste in that link, what should happen is that this Amplify actor is going to run. All right, and I'm going to get some data back in my N8N instance. All right, so with that being said, let me go ahead. I'm going to unpin the data, and I'm going to go ahead and test this workflow. I'm going to paste in the Zillow link for that property we just looked at. I'm going to hit submit, and as we see, it's running here. And as we see here, oh, look at that. It's actually running for us. All right, so now we're just going to go ahead and wait for that data to come back. All right, perfect. So it completed. Let's go ahead and open it up. All right, I'm going to check the JSON. I'm going to pin it, and perfect. All right, so we're looking here, and as we see, it's a 4-bed, 3, it's a 4-3, the price is 430. And if we go back here, yeah, we see it's a 4-3, built in 05. So the scraper worked, right? So we just sent an API request over to that scraper, and we got back some JSON data. All right. Now, this is really why it's important this is really why it's important that you want to understand how to work with APIs in N8N, because this is what's really going to bring your workflow alive. Okay, and then basically from here, what I like to do, because oftentimes when you're working with an API and you're getting back data, sometimes you don't need absolutely everything in order to do what you want to do. So oftentimes when I'm calling an API, I like to add a set field. So I like to say, maybe I want to map the city. So I get the city that the property's in. Maybe I want to get the price. So I'm just going to say price. And I'm going to come down here. I'm going to drag this over here, right? And let's get one more thing, right? So let's go ahead and get zip code. So I'm going to say zip underscore code. And I'm going to drag the zip code element here. And if I hit test step, well, you'll see that, great, all this data here, and we just filtered it down to just these 3 things, right? So when you send an API request and you want specific information, it's a really good idea to just include some set fields. You don't have to, but I like it because it keeps my workflows clean. And if I want to split this node out to different things, it's easy to do that after the set versus here where I'm looking through all this information. All right, perfect. So just like that, we just made our first call. All right, so now let's go ahead and do a little bit more of an advanced one. We're going to use the OpenAI image generation. Okay, so for this, right, we're going to go ahead and tap into OpenAI's image generation API. So this here is the OpenAI API documentation in order to generate the images. As you see here, it's OpenAPI, V1 image generations. And first thing you'll see, if you saw from the last example, it's a post request. In the case of Appify, all we had to do was kind of just copy the URL and paste it. And that was it, right? All the authentication, everything was handled for us. In this case, however, there's an example request. If you want data from this API, then this is the request that you need to send. Now, you're going to notice some things in here, right? You're going to notice that, well, there's a content type, there's an authorization, bearer, right? The model, there's a prompt, there's size. Like, right, what does all this mean, right? So this is why you really want to learn how to read API documentation. So if you scroll down here, for example, you'll see one of the things that's in the API request is size. So if you come down here, we see size, and that's basically the size of the generated images. All right, so prompt is really just what we want from the API. So we see a text description of the desired images. We see that it's required, meaning that if we fail to input it, well, the request is not going to happen. And another thing too, you can also choose the model, right? So if you want, you can use DALL-E 2, DALL-E 3, you can use GPT image 1, right? And if you don't do anything, it's going to default to DALL-E unless a parameter is specific to the GT image 1. All right, so you can basically just kind of like how you can choose between GTP model 4.0 or 4 mini or Gemini 2.5, just you can actually choose which image model that you want to use. Okay, so how do we set up the API request now? All right, so first thing you're gonna notice, again, we know it's the post, but we actually need to set this up. Now, fortunately for us, we see here it's a curl request, right? So you might go on some websites and their documentation might be like a Node or a Python, something like a software engineer would use when they're writing code. But since we're just making an API request through an HTTP, all we need is this curl. And as you see, they provide a very convenient copy button here. So what we're going to do, we're going to come here to image gen, and actually we need to set up our form, right? So what information do we want from this? Well, we're going to want, right? So model, I won't be picky, so I'll just leave that as default, but most definitely we're going to want a prompt, and we're going to want probably specify a size. So I'm going to come here and I'm just going to set up our form, and I'm going to say image prompt. All right, and that's going to be text, perfect. And then for form element, I will actually make this a drop-down list, because in the API documentation underneath the images, we see here that we can't just specify any image we want. It has to be one of these sizes. So it has to be either 1024 by 1024. So that's an option, or it can be this size here. So I'll make that an option, and I'll just add one more, right? So I'll say if we want this as well, this here is an option. All right, perfect. And we could just call this image size. All right, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and save. All right, and just to make sure our form is set up right, I'm going to launch a test, and perfect. So we have an image prompt and we have a size that we can select. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit stop on that. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do, we need to go ahead and set up an HTTP request. So in order to set up the HTTP, again, I just hit tab on my computer. I'm going to type in HTTP. I click it, and we see that it's right here. Okay, so first, actually what I always like to do, let me just deactivate this, and I just want to test my form real quick. So I'll just say, right, very generic, 1024, and I'll just hit submit. And as we see here, we have the data. So we have the prompt and we have the image size. All right, perfect. Okay, so in our HTTP request, because they provided a curl example, and again, they have the copy button here, all we have to do is come here, we're gonna hit copy on here, and we're gonna hit import curl. We're gonna paste this here and hit import. And just like that, it actually populates it here in N8N for us, which is very convenient. All right, so again, there are some things like model. Well, we're gonna let it default. So I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna just hit trash on that. Name, we don't really need that. I'm gonna hit trash. All we are gonna specify is basically the prompt we want and the value. All right, so as you see here, we already went ahead and just did a quick example. So I'm gonna pin the data. I'm going to map it here. All right, and what I need to do is I need to fill in these JSON objects, right? I need to let the API know exactly what I'm asking for. So in the value, this is the prompt. So in the value, I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to drag in this prompt. And in N8N, it automatically toggles to expression because we're dynamically mapping it. All right, so same thing, the image size, I'm gonna delete that, and I'm gonna put in the image size. Perfect, right? So if you wanna see what it looks like, this here is what we're mapping, but in the case of the form that we just submitted, this is the output that it sees, all right? And same thing here, right? So I'm saying create me an image of two robots talking. That was the same as the prompt that I put in. Okay, perfect. So now that we see that it's here, right? The URL is set to the URL that they specified here. Perfect. Oops. Yeah, so the URL is set to the correct URL. So the method is properly set. Again, we see that it's a post request. Now, the next thing is that they do require headers. All right. So in this case, there is an authorization header, and we have to actually put in an API key. Now, very important, you're going to see this thing here that says bear, right? And some APIs request this, some don't, but basically, whenever you see this, just leave it alone, have a space, and you're going to input your API key. Now, one thing I do want to note here is that in order to use this image generation API, you have to go through a verification process. So you try to access this API without doing that, it's going to fail. But it was quick and easy. I did it in 2 minutes. Okay, so it needs an API key. So what I need to do is I need to generate an OpenAI key. So I'm going to hop over here and I'm going to create a new secret key. And I'm just going to call this YouTube test. This is just a temporary key that I'll be deleting after. And I'm going to go ahead and create this key. I'm going to copy it. All right. And I'm going to go back to N8N and I want to open this up and I'm going to just paste in my API key. All right, perfect. So as we see here, all right, so we have the value, we have the size. So without further ado, let's go ahead and test it. All right, so I'm going to hit test step and let's see what happens. Okay, and perfect. And just like that, it's sent back here this URL. So if we go ahead and click on it here, I'm going to go ahead and actually I didn't get the whole thing. Let me hit search and yep, just like that, it generated me this. All right, awesome. Now that image, it was okay, but actually we kind of wanted more of a high quality one. So I can actually, so let's say after the fact you change your mind, you want to add in something. It's pretty simple, right? So this here, again, we see an object. So what I'm going to do, I can come here and add parameter. I'm just going to say model. And you don't have to worry about adding in all these quotation marks in this because it does it for you already. And let's say I want to use the GPT image one. I'm going to copy that here and I'm going to paste that in here. All right, so same thing. Now this time, let's see if we can test something a little bit better. First, let me come here. I'm going to unpin this data. All right, so let me go ahead and launch this form here. All right, so let's say, okay, and for image size, we're going to say the same thing. So I'm just going to hit 10 by 24, and I'm going to go ahead and submit it. And just like that, it's submitted successfully. Now, the reason that the whole workflow didn't run is because I just actually hit test step. So if we come here to the image node, we can see here, okay, this is exactly what I requested. So I'm going to go ahead and hit test step and it's going to execute. Okay, perfect. And it executed. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit show data. Okay, so one thing you're going to notice is that, so the GPT image one is a much better image generation model. So it doesn't pass the image, it passes something called a base64 file. So in order to convert it, you have to click on convert file and move straight to file. And basically what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to pass in the base64 and it's going to go ahead, I'm going to hit test step and it's going to generate the image. And this here's the image that I got. All right. Awesome. Much better quality than the last one I got. So correction, I believe this, in order to use this model, the GPT image one, you do have to verify. The last one I used was the DALL-E and I don't believe you have to verify on that one. Okay, perfect. So that is the second API that we have successfully set up. All right, so for this test, we're going to go ahead and use the rentcast API. And I picked this one out for a reason because the rentcast API uses something called query parameters. Okay, so we're here on the rentcast API. And again, same thing, right? We're looking at the value estimate. Now, what rentcast does is that it gives us the ability to give it an address and it gets us back some data. Now, right off the bat, same thing, you're gonna notice that it's a GET request, and this here is the URL to send the request to. And they have, same thing, they have a curl request example here. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and grab our HTTP node. I'm gonna grab the node, I'm gonna put it here. So it's a GET, I'm gonna copy this here for the value. I'm gonna come back here, right? So my method is GET, I'm gonna paste in this here. So if we come back to the documentation, if we scroll down, we see that it's sent as a query parameter, right? So what exactly is that? And I do have it outlined here in the documentation, but if you go back here, you'll see that if you look here at this URL, right? So we see v1 avm value, right? And in their example, you see the same thing, avm value, question mark, and then this starts the query parameter. So all a query parameter is it basically dynamically maps the input fields to the URL. So whenever we're setting the API, we're sending this URL followed by a question mark, followed by all the information, right, that we want to get back from this URL. So since it's a query parameter, it's not a body like the Apify scraper, for example. All right, so in order to enable that, all we're going to do is we're going to come here to send query parameters. We're going to toggle this on, right? And we need to set up these fields. So before we actually get set up with setting up these query parameters, we actually need to set up our header, right? So now this is where it was made easy in the Apify scraper. So if you come here to credentials, you'll see that it has this thing called X API key. So if I type in, let's say 123, this new item appeared here. So whenever you're sending data to an API, more than likely, you're going to have a key. So in this case, I need an API key. right? So I need to set up all these headers. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to send headers. And the first header I'm going to send is accept. So I'm going to paste that there. I'm going to come back. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it there. And I believe I had a space. So I'm just going to remove the space, add parameter. I'm going to paste in API key. So I'm going to copy that, paste it in here. I'm going to leave this blank because I got to generate an API key. And then lastly, host. I'm going to copy that, paste it here. Then I'm going to copy this, paste it there. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and generate an API key. I already have one, but I'm going to generate a temporary one. So I'll just call this the YouTube key. Whoops. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to create the key. All right, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to paste in the key. All right, perfect. All right, so we're not sending a body, it's a query parameter, so we're going to send these query parameters. All right, so what do we know? Well, we know we need to pass in an address, a bedrooms, and bathrooms. All right, so I'm going to copy address, right? I'm going to paste it there. I'm going to paste in our name because we're going to map the fields from our form. So same thing, I'm going to pass in the bedrooms and need to pass in the bathrooms. Okay, so I didn't pin the data, so let me just go ahead and launch the form really quickly here. I'm just going to come here and copy this. Okay, and I'm going to paste in the address, and I believe it was a 4, yep, it's a 4.3, so I'm just going to come back here with the form. I'm going to say 4.3, I'm going to hit submit, and we have the data here. All right, perfect. Now let's go ahead and map it. So I drag it here. Now for address, bedrooms, and bathrooms, so we can take the address, place it there. Bedrooms, we're going to take it here, place it there. And then bathrooms, so we're going to place it there. Okay, so when I hit test step, dynamically a question mark is going to appear after here, and the address, the bedrooms, and the bathrooms are all going to appear, and we're going to get some data back. All right, and they provided an example of the type of data that we can expect back. So we can get the price, the low range, the high range. So that being said, let's go ahead and hit test step. So as you see, it executed pretty fast. We got the price, right? It has the low, the high, right? Just like the documentation said that it would. All right. And same thing, I like to have a set field. So let's just say I want the average price. I can just take this, drag it there. And if I hit test step, I have the average price. All right, perfect. And if I want to, I can even modify it a bit. So if I hit test step again, now a dollar symbol appears in front of it. All right. And then from there, we can do more with it, right? So if we want to pass it to ChatGPT, if we want to input it somewhere else or send an email, right? We can always map that data. All right. So the Appify form, right? We sent actually not here, but in HTTP, we sent a JSON body. All right. Because that's what the documentation said to pass. So we sent a JSON body. And in this case, for the Rentcast API, we sent a query parameter. So the JSON body is toggled off and the query parameter is toggled on. All right, perfect. Okay, so obviously you want to build AI workflows and AI agents. You don't always want to log into your N8N account in order for things to run. Maybe you want to submit data through a form or a Slack message or something like that, and then you want it to be processed here. Now, N8N does ship with different things. So there's different triggers. Like I believe they have one for Slack, and you can actually have a Slack trigger. So if a new user or if a file is shared or a message or something like that, right, you can have different trigger points for external applications. But in this case, I'm going to show you a very classic example. It's called a webhook. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and set up a simple tool called Tally. It's basically a software to make forms. All right. So as you see here, I created some new forms already, but let me go ahead and create a new one. So I'm going to call this one YouTube demo. And let's just say I just want to pass in some simple information. Maybe I just want to pass in a short answer for, let's say, first name. Maybe I want to pass in a, let's say, number for phone number. And let's say I also want to pass in one for email address. All right, so I'm going to say email. All right, perfect. So I'm going to publish it. I'm going to come here to integrations, and you see here this webhook. So a lot of external tools where you're just kind of passing data, they often work through webhooks. They may also have a direct integration in N8N, but if they don't, you definitely want to look for a webhook like this. So I'm going to come here to connect. And what I'm going to do here, my webhook node, is I'm going to come here and hit open. Now, this here is the URL. So you're going to notice there's two things. There's a test URL and a production URL. Because I'm testing right now, I'm going to copy this URL here. Now, one thing you're going to notice here is the HTTP method, right? It's a get, right? In this case, we actually need to change it to post. And the way that you would know is that if you come here, you'll see webhooks allow you to receive HTTP post requests to a URL. All right. So with that being said, I have the URL here. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste it. I'm going to hit connect. Perfect. All right. And then this is the path. So by the way, you could edit this if you want to. So if I wanted to, I could say get new form data. And as you see, it changes the URL structure. So I have to come here and copy it again. I can come here and paste it. So let's say I can update it. I can save it. Perfect. So let's go ahead and just give it a try. All right. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to say first name, Cameron, phone number. I'm just going to say 555-555-5555. And I'm just going to say example@gmail.com. And because, again, this is not active, I'm going to hit test workflow. And when I submit this information, I should get in my N8N instance, which I did. So if I come here and hit open, we scroll down, we can see here, we got the phone number, we got the email, we got the first name. And again, same thing. I like to just go ahead and include a set field. So I can just say name. I can come down here. I can drag the value. Right? You can do the same for all the other fields. When you hit test step, you'll get all the information that you want. All right, perfect. Well, I hope that added value to you. Again, I will make all of these here available as a template. So you can go ahead and just kind of play around, test with them. So if you want the template and you want this document here, I'll make it all available in the description below. So I hope that added value to you, so you can actually go ahead and use APIs to really start taking your N8N skills to the next level and really start using it in a much more robust way. So with that being said, hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one.